Northern France, October 14th, 1943. 03:20 hours. The night pressed against the B-17 bomber like a cold, black fist. Lieutenant James Harrington, navigator for the 91st Bombardment Group, watched the flickering instrument panel cast ghostly shadows across his charts. Their flying fortress, the Lucky Lady, was limping back across the English Channel after a bombing run over Germany that had been anything but lucky. 3 engines functioning at 60%, Jim. "Fourth's gone completely," Captain Miller's voice crackled through the intercom, steady despite the circumstances. "Navigation status." Harrington wiped condensation from his instruments. "Course set for 282 degrees. Captain, estimated time to English coast is 47 minutes, assuming wind patterns hold." He didn't mention what they all knew, that their altitude was dropping steadily, the bomber gradually surrendering to gravity with each passing minute. The Lucky Lady had been among 24 bombers targeting a ball-bearing factory in Schweinfurt. The flak had been merciless, German 80-meter guns seeking them out with uncanny precision. They'd survived the initial barrage, only to face a swarm of Messerschmitt fighters that tore through their formation like wolves through scattered sheep. Half their squadron hadn't made it past the target. Suddenly, the aircraft jolted violently, and the port wing dipped. The plane entered a shallow, uncontrolled turn. "Hydraulics failing," the flight engineer shouted over the intercom. "We're losing pressure fast." Captain Miller's voice remained calm. "All crew prepare for possible water landing or bailout. Lieutenant Harrington, mark our position and prepare emergency kits." Harrington reached beneath his station to the small compartment where the bailout kits were stored. Each contained the essentials for survival in hostile territory: a small first aid packet, emergency rations, water purification tablets, local currency, phrase cards for basic communication, a silk map of the region, and most importantly, the newly issued M592 escape compass. The plane lurched again. This time the dive was steeper, more pronounced. Through the small navigation window, Harrington caught sight of the French coastline below, occupied territory. Their altitude was now barely 3,000 feet, and dropping rapidly. "We're not going to make the channel," Miller announced. "Prepare to bail out. Remember your training. Head south toward the Pyrenees if possible. Good luck, gentlemen." The bailout alarm sounded. Harrington secured his kit inside his flight jacket, checking once more that the tiny brass compass was safely tucked in his inner pocket. It was smaller than a shirt button, intentionally designed to be concealed from German search parties. He'd never given it much thought during training, but now, facing the reality of landing in Nazi-occupied France, that minuscule instrument had become the most valuable tool in his possession. One by one, the crew members disappeared into the howling void. Harrington waited until last, helping the wounded tail gunner with his parachute before finally making his way to the open hatch. The cold air struck his face like a physical blow. Below, the dark landscape of northern France waited, a patchwork of forests and fields, every acre potentially hiding either salvation or capture. Harrington jumped, counting slowly as he fell through the darkness. 1,000, 2,000. He pulled the ripcord and felt the violent jerk as the parachute deployed, suddenly transforming his plummeting descent into an eerie, swinging silence. The distant sound of the failing bomber engines faded as the Lucky Lady continued her final journey without her crew. As he drifted downward, Harrington felt the weight of the tiny compass against his chest. Just half an inch in diameter, made of brass with a simple magnetic needle suspended in fluid, it represented his only chance of navigating the dangerous path home. If he could evade capture, if he could make contact with the French resistance, if he could reach the Pyrenees, each step dependent on knowing which way was south. He landed hard in a ploughed field, rolling to absorb the impact as he'd been trained. The night was silent except for the distant rumble of artillery to the east. Working quickly, Harrington gathered his parachute, burying it beneath loose soil and fallen leaves. Then, huddled against the base of an oak tree, he removed the M592 compass from his pocket and held it carefully in his palm. The tiny device gleamed dully in the moonlight. North was marked with two luminous dots of radium paint that glowed with ghostly intensity. Harrington oriented himself, identifying south. The Pyrenees Mountains and neutral Spain lay in that direction, hundreds of miles away. He began walking, keeping to the shadows, one foot after another toward a freedom that seemed impossibly distant. The weight of the compass in his hand was almost nothing, hardly more substantial than a coin, yet it represented the difference between capture and survival, between imprisonment and freedom. Lieutenant James Harrington was the first of 27 airmen who would depend on that same design of compass to navigate the treacherous path home from behind enemy lines that autumn. Before the war ended, hundreds more would owe their lives to an invention so small it could be hidden in plain sight, yet so crucial it would alter the fate of countless Allied airmen shot down over hostile territory. MI9 Headquarters, London, January 18, 1943. 900 hours. Clayton Hutton hunched over his workbench in the basement of the nondescript government building that housed MI9, the British military intelligence section responsible for aiding Allied prisoners of war and downed airmen. Around him lay dozens of prototypes, cloth maps printed on silk, miniature radios disguised as cigarette packets, hacksaw blades sewn into uniform collars. But it was the collection of tiny compasses that occupied his attention this morning. "Joe, problem is concealment, sir," said Sergeant Morris, the RAF technical advisor assigned to Hutton's team. "The Germans are getting better at searches. They're finding our standard-issue compasses, even the smaller ones." Hutton nodded, examining a traditional escape compass under a magnifying glass. At 15 millimeters in diameter, it was already remarkably small. But as reports from captured and escaped airmen confirmed, German search protocols had adapted. They now routinely checked seams, buttons, and even dental work for hidden tools. "Our men need something that can survive a thorough search," Hutton muttered, more to himself than to Morris. "Something that looks like it belongs exactly where it is." The statistics haunted him. For every 100 airmen shot down over occupied Europe, fewer than 5 made it back to Allied territory. The others were captured, often because they lost their way during evasion attempts or moved in the wrong direction after bailout. A compass that could survive a search could dramatically improve those numbers. Hutton picked up a uniform button from the workbench. Standard issue for RAF flight crews. It was made of brass with the Royal Air Force insignia embossed on the front. He turned it over in his fingers, contemplating the space inside. "What if the compass became the button itself?" he asked. "Or rather, what if the button concealed the compass?" Over the next 6 weeks, Hutton and his team worked through 47 different prototypes. The challenges were substantial. The compass needed to be small enough to fit inside a uniform button, but large enough to be usable. The magnetic needle had to remain accurate despite being surrounded by metal. The whole assembly needed to be waterproof, durable, and, most importantly, undetectable during standard prisoner searches. The breakthrough came in late February. Using a brass RAF uniform button as the shell, Hutton's team engineered a secret compartment accessed by unscrewing the top. Inside, they placed a miniaturized compass with minimal markings, just enough to indicate magnetic north with 2 tiny dots of radium paint that glowed faintly in darkness. The entire assembly weighed less than a normal button and looked identical from the outside. "The beauty of it is its simplicity," Hutton explained to Air Vice Marshal Melville, head of MI9, during the official presentation. "A German guard can hold it in his hand, and unless he specifically attempts to unscrew it, which he has no reason to do, he'll never know it's anything but a standard uniform button." The first production run yielded 500 button compasses. They were issued selectively at first, primarily to bomber crews operating over Germany, where the risk of being shot down was highest. The initial distribution went to the 8th Air Force and Bomber Command units conducting daylight raids, missions with the highest casualty rates. Lieutenant Harrington had been among the first to receive one, along with minimal instruction. Standard uniform button. Unscrew to reveal compass. North indicated by double luminous dots. Replace when not in use. Tell no one. Initial reports were promising. Of the first 27 airmen known to have bailed out with the button compasses, 8 successfully evaded capture and made it back to Allied lines, a success rate nearly quadruple the previous average. The others were captured. But importantly, none reported that their compasses had been discovered during searches. Major Ellis of the Intelligence Division studied the growing collection of debriefing reports. The pattern is clear, he noted during the April assessment meeting. Our evaders are maintaining better directional awareness. They're making fewer navigational errors, but most significantly, even those who are captured still have their compasses when they reach the POW camps. This last point proved unexpectedly valuable. In Stalag Luft III, the primary German camp for captured Allied airmen, the presence of undetected compasses became a critical component in escape planning. The Germans had learned to search for and confiscate traditional compasses, making navigation during escape attempts nearly impossible. But the button compasses, hidden in plain sight, provided the crucial directional guidance needed for the complex tunnel systems being constructed beneath the camp. By summer 1943, production had ramped up to 2,000 button compasses per month. Distribution expanded to include fighter pilots, paratroopers, and special operations personnel. The tiny devices were sewn onto flying jackets, service uniforms, and even civilian clothes provided in escape kits. What made the button compass truly revolutionary wasn't just its concealability, but its psychological impact. Airmen reported feeling more confident knowing they had a reliable navigational tool that would survive capture. This confidence translated into better decision-making during evasion attempts and increased willingness to attempt escape if captured. "It's not just a compass," one returned evader told Hutton during debriefing. "It's knowing you have options, knowing you're not completely at their mercy." As Allied bombing campaigns intensified in late 1943, the number of aircraft lost over enemy territory increased proportionally, yet the percentage of airmen successfully returning to Allied control rose from under 5% to nearly 17%. A transformation attributed largely to improved evasion equipment, with the button compass playing a central role. Clayton Hutton kept a map in his office tracking confirmed successful evasions. By October 1943, when Lieutenant Harrington bailed out over France, the map contained 73 pins, each representing an airman who had made it home with the help of the button compass. By the war's end, that number would exceed 600. For the men facing the terrifying prospect of bailout over hostile territory, the difference between capture and freedom often came down to something as fundamental as knowing which way was south. In the form of a device smaller than a penny, Hutton had given them that knowledge, and with it, hope. Toulouse, France, November 2nd, 1943. 2215 hours. Lieutenant Harrington had been moving south for 19 days. 19 days of cold nights spent hiding in barns and abandoned buildings. 19 days of hunger partially satisfied by the meager emergency rations in his escape kit, supplemented occasionally by the generosity of French farmers brave enough to aid an Allied airman. 19 days of constant vigilance, never knowing if the next person he encountered would offer help or betrayal. The tiny button compass had guided him every step of the way. Each morning at first light, he would carefully unscrew the top of what appeared to be a standard RAF uniform button and confirm his direction. Each evening, he would do the same, ensuring his path remained true toward the Pyrenees and the neutral territory of Spain beyond. Tonight, He huddled in the back room of a small bakery in Toulouse. Madame Fournier, the grey-haired woman who owned the establishment, had closed the shutters and spoken to him in broken English. "You American airmen, yes, the resistance. They tell me to expect you." This was the first concrete confirmation that the underground network he'd been told about actually existed. For nearly 3 weeks, he'd been passed from one sympathetic French civilian to another, each promising that friends would eventually help him cross into Spain. Now, it seemed those friends had a name: the Resistance. "My name is Harrington, ma'am. Lieutenant James Harrington, United States Army Air Forces." The woman nodded. "Others come before you. Americans, British. They go south to Spain." She gestured to a small trapdoor in the floor. "Below, you wait. Tomorrow, Marcel comes. He takes you to mountains." The cellar was cool and smelled of flour and yeast. A small pallet had been prepared in the corner, along with bread, cheese, and a bottle of wine. Harrington ate gratefully, his first substantial meal in days. As he settled onto the pallet, he removed the button compass from his pocket, checking it one more time by the light of a single candle. The ritual had become second nature. Unscrew the top, locate the luminous dots indicating north, mentally calculate his position relative to the Spanish border. Even here, presumably safe within the resistance network, the compass provided reassurance. Before dawn, he was awakened by the sound of the trapdoor opening. A man descended the ladder, young with dark features and the weathered hands of someone accustomed to outdoor labor. "I am Marcel," he said simply. "We leave now. Bring nothing that identifies you as military." Harrington had long since discarded his flight jacket and any other items that might mark him as an Allied airman. He wore civilian clothes provided by farmers along his journey south. The only military item he retained was the button compass, now sewn onto his shirt where it appeared indistinguishable from any ordinary button. Marcel led him through the silent pre-dawn streets of Toulouse to a small truck loaded with farm equipment. "Under the tarpaulin," he instructed. "Do not move or speak, no matter what happens." The journey lasted all day, the truck stopping frequently at German checkpoints. Each time, Harrington held his breath beneath the tarpaulin, listening to Marcel's casual conversations with the German soldiers, amazed at the young Frenchman's composure. By nightfall, they had reached the foothills of the Pyrenees. Marcel parked the truck in a small clearing and helped Harrington out. "From here, we walk," he said. "Be 3 days to the border, if weather permits." As they prepared to set off into the mountains, Marcel produced something from his pocket, another button compass, identical to Harrington's. "You have one also, yes?" he asked. "They send them to us now, with the supply drops. Before, we used the stars, landmarks. Many got lost. Too many." He shook his head. "But these have saved many lives." Harrington was stunned. "You're saying the resistance is using the same compasses?" Marcel nodded. "We, small enough to hide, accurate enough to navigate. The Germans never find them." He smiled grimly. "We call them les petits guides, the little guides." Over the next 3 days, as they traversed increasingly difficult terrain, Marcel explained the evolution of the escape network. Initially established to help downed Allied airmen, it had grown to include routes for escaping Jews, political prisoners, and others fleeing Nazi persecution. The network stretched from the English Channel to the Spanish border, with hundreds of ordinary French citizens risking their lives to maintain it. But navigation was always the problem, Marcel explained during a brief rest on their second day in the mountains. At night, in fog, in forests, easy to become lost. Guides would take wrong paths, entire groups captured because of single directional error. The introduction of the button compasses had transformed their operations. Now, even if a group became separated or a guide was captured, others could continue to navigate with precision. The number of successful crossings had nearly doubled since the compasses had been included in supply drops 6 months earlier. On the third day, they reached a high mountain pass. The November air was bitter with cold, the path treacherous with early snow and ice. Marcel pointed to a valley below. "Spain," he said simply. 2 kilometers. I leave you here. Follow the valley. Keep the mountains on your right. Border patrol comes at 0300 and 0600. Cross between." Before departing, he pressed something into Harrington's hand, a second button compass. "Take this," Marcel said, "for the next airman you meet who needs to find his way home." Harrington crossed into Spain between patrols, just as Marcel had instructed. From there, he made contact with British intelligence officers in Barcelona who arranged his return to England. 27 days after bailing out over occupied France, he landed at RAF Northolt outside London. During debriefing, he recounted every detail of his journey, emphasizing repeatedly the crucial role played by the button compass, both his own and those being used throughout the resistance network. "It's not just helping our boys get home," he explained to the intelligence officer. "It's become a vital tool for the entire underground. They're using it to move people, supplies, information, all right under the Germans' noses." The intelligence officer made careful notes. "We've heard similar reports from other returned evaders. What began as a simple navigational aid for downed airmen has evolved into something far more significant. The compass has become a foundation of the entire evasion infrastructure. By December 1943, the flow of button compasses to resistance networks had been formalized. Regular supply drops now included dozens of the devices distributed to key personnel throughout occupied Europe. What had started as a tool for individual survival had transformed into a critical component of the broader Allied strategy to undermine German control. For Lieutenant Harrington, the significance of the tiny device had become clear. It wasn't just about finding his own way home. It was about creating pathways for hundreds of others to do the same. The compass that had guided him south had become part of something much larger, a forbidden network of hope stretching across occupied Europe, pointing the way to freedom. Allied Intelligence Headquarters, London, May 8, 1945. 1500 hours. The war in Europe was officially over. Germany had surrendered unconditionally to the Allied forces, bringing an end to nearly 6 years of conflict. In a nondescript room at Intelligence Headquarters, Clayton Hutton sat across from Air Commodore Archie Boyle, reviewing the final assessment of the button compass program. "The numbers speak for themselves," Boyle said, sliding a folder across the table. Over 9,000 button compasses distributed throughout occupied Europe. 623 confirmed cases of successful evasion directly attributed to their use. An additional 2,000 cases where they played a supporting role in escape and resistance operations. Hutton nodded, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction. When he had first proposed the concept in early 1943, the goal had been modest: improve the odds for downed airmen attempting to evade capture. No one had anticipated how thoroughly the device would transform the entire evasion infrastructure. "There's something else," Boyle continued. "Something unexpected that emerged from our final debriefings of returned POWs and resistance operatives." He removed several sheets of paper from the folder. It wasn't just the practical navigation capability that made the difference. It was the psychological impact. Hutton leaned forward, interested. Psychological. In what way? The presence of the compass, even when not actively being used, provided a sense of control in otherwise chaotic circumstances, Boyle explained. Evaders reported feeling less helpless, more confident in their decision-making. The mere knowledge that they possessed a reliable means of orientation made them less likely to panic, more likely to make rational choices under pressure. This psychological benefit extended beyond individual evaders. Within resistance networks, The reliable distribution of identical compasses created a standardized system of navigation that improved coordination between different cells. Groups that previously had difficulty synchronizing movements due to varied navigational methods now operated with unified directional understanding. Perhaps most significantly, Boyle continued, was the impact within POW camps. The undetectable nature of the button compass meant that many captured airmen still had them when they reached the camps. This led to a dramatic improvement in escape planning. The most notable example had come from Stalag Luft III, where the Great Escape had been executed in March 1944. Though most of the escapees had ultimately been recaptured, debriefings revealed that the button compasses had played a crucial role in the planning and execution of the tunnel system. The ability to maintain precise orientation underground in total darkness had been essential to the engineering feat of constructing tunnels over 100 meters long. The Germans never fully understood what they were dealing with, Boyle said. They knew about standard compasses, of course, searched for them regularly, but the button design remained largely undetected until the final months of the war. By then, it was too late. The technology had proliferated throughout occupied Europe, becoming an integral part of resistance operations from Norway to Greece. Lieutenant Harrington, now Captain Harrington after his return to active duty, had played his own role in this expansion. Following his successful evasion through France, he had been assigned to the newly formed Air-Sea Rescue School, where he trained air crews in survival techniques. The button compass featured prominently in his instruction. "To keep it with you at all times," he would tell each class of airmen. "It doesn't matter if you're over Germany, France, or the Pacific. Knowing which way is north can mean the difference between capture and freedom." As Allied forces had advanced across Europe in late 1944 and early 1945, they encountered numerous former evaders who had been unable to complete their journeys home, but had survived in hiding with the help of resistance networks. Many of these men had remarkable stories about the button compass. A B-24 gunner shot down over Romania had used his to navigate through 4 countries over 7 months before meeting advancing Soviet forces. A British Mosquito pilot had evaded capture in Denmark for over a year, serving with the local resistance while using his compass for nighttime sabotage operations. A Free French airman had organized an entire escape network in Normandy, with button compasses distributed to key personnel at every waypoint. "What happens to the program now?" Hutton asked, after reviewing the final statistics. "Officially, it's being discontinued," Boyle replied. "The war's over, after all, but unofficially," he hesitated. "Let's just say that certain intelligence agencies see value in the concept for potential future conflicts." Indeed, the legacy of the button compass would continue long after World War II. The design would be refined for use during the Cold War, with versions issued to pilots flying over Soviet territory and to intelligence operatives working behind the Iron Curtain. The fundamental principle, critical navigation tools hidden in plain sight, would influence escape and evasion equipment development for decades to come. For the men who had depended on it during the darkest days of the war, the button compass represented something beyond its practical function. It had been a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the most dire circumstances, a path to freedom existed, if one could just maintain the right direction. In the final analysis prepared for the War Cabinet, Air Commodore Boyle summarized the program's impact. The button compass, though among the smallest pieces of equipment issued to Allied personnel, demonstrated disproportionate strategic value. Its effect extended beyond individual survival to influence resistance operations, intelligence gathering, and even POW camp dynamics. In the fog of war, where disorientation often led to capture or death, this humble device provided clarity and direction. Its legacy is measured not merely in the hundreds of airmen who successfully returned to Allied control, but in the thousands of operations it enabled throughout occupied Europe, a minuscule instrument with immense impact. On a shelf in Clayton Hutton's office at MI9 sat a single-button compass, indistinguishable from an ordinary RAF uniform button except to those who knew its secret. It was the first prototype, created in those early days of 1943, when the concept was still taking shape. Next to it lay a simple card containing a message from an American lieutenant who had successfully evaded capture after being shot down over France. When everything else was taken from me, my aircraft, my crew, my freedom, this little compass remained, pointing the way home. I shall never forget the guidance it provided in my darkest hour. For the thousands of Allied airmen who flew combat missions over hostile territory, knowing that this tiny device traveled with them provided immeasurable reassurance. Most would never need to use it, but for those who did, those who found themselves suddenly descending by parachute into enemy-held lands, the button compass represented their first step on the long journey home. Official records attribute 623 successful evasions directly to the button compass. The true number is likely far higher, as many evaders integrated into resistance operations never officially reported their experiences. What is certain is that a device measuring less than half an inch in diameter, weighing less than a quarter of an ounce, changed the fate of countless Allied personnel, proving that sometimes the smallest tools can have the most profound impact.